worms pull bugs into their thrall, till the ages pass and kingdoms fall.
These words, spoken by Mr. Mushroom, provide the greatest insight into one of Hollow Knight's most important characters, the Pale King, because they explain his motivations throughout the game's story. As a worm, the Pale King's main goal and natural instinct was to try to be worshipped by as many subjects as possible. This is what led him to create Hallownest, is the reason why he attempted to annex surrounding societies into his kingdom, and was the guiding principle behind all of the laws that he created. Now, one thing to note about the Pale King is that he was an autocrat, meaning that he was the sole bug responsible for ruling Hallownest. The Pale King had the final authority over everything in his kingdom, and had no checks or balances on his power. In autocratic governments, the public has no say in matters of government, and citizens are typically kept in line through fear. However, this poses an issue for the Pale King's rule, since he didn't just desire to rule, he wished to be worshipped as a king and as a god. If you look carefully, you can see how the Pale King navigated this issue, primarily by using political messaging to ensure that reverence for both him and his kingdom was instilled in all of his subjects. This is a practice used in many dictatorships in real life to gain support from citizens to have their own freedoms taken from them. And a major part of this strategy is banning and vilifying things that pose a threat to the regime. This strategy is evident in the Pale King's rule of Hallownest as well, and is what I will explore in this video. In particular, I want to analyze how two specific substances in Hallownest were banned and vilified by the Pale King to preserve his popularity with his subjects. But first, let me ask you the following question. Why the heck is Winnie the Pooh banned in China? In 2017, the Chinese Communist Party began censoring imagery and media of Winnie the Pooh, specifically of images comparing the appearance of Winnie the Pooh to China's leader Xi Jinping. This was following several years of people making memes comparing the two. But why would the CCP make such a big deal out of this? Surely a few memes comparing China's leader to a cartoon character can't be that harmful, right? As a matter of fact, it can be. In order to understand that, though, we need to talk about something called a cult of personality. A cult of personality is a tactic in which the leader of an authoritarian state uses propaganda to portray a perfect, almost godlike image of themselves in order to gain more unquestioning devotion and obedience from their citizens. China is an authoritarian state, and so Xi Jinping is a leader who needs to maintain a cult of personality, one of a strong and confident leader who can protect their people from any threat. But how does that relate to Winnie the Pooh? Well, Pooh's character is actually a rather unflattering comparison for a dictator. Pooh is generally depicted as a bumbling, naive character. He's a glutton, he's lazy, he's overweight, and doesn't have a strong understanding of many simple concepts. This makes it more clear why he would be banned in China for being compared to its leader. These sorts of comparisons will make citizens take their leader less seriously, not viewing them as the big, strong leader they attempt to portray themselves as. And this can shatter a cult of personality, revealing them as nothing more than a fraud that restricts their own people's freedoms. The cult of personality is one reason why authoritarian governments will ban things in their country, but there are other reasons as well. In North Korea, for example, there is a general ban on all media that is not considered favorable for its regime, and its leader, Kim Jong-un. According to a report by the US State Department in 2016, there are no independent media in the country, all media are strictly censored, and no deviation from the official government line is tolerated. This censorship allows North Korea to completely control the narratives on all political matters for its citizens. North Korea often uses this control of information to vilify countries that are seen as undesirable to them. And due to the lack of information contrary to this narrative, this allows North Korea to make its citizens far more supportive of their rulers, and fearful of supposed external threats. This specific strategy is noted in a book on North Korea by B.R. Myers, in which he states that in relation to America, North Korea wishes not to diffuse tension, but to manage it, to keep it from tipping into all-out war, or an equally perilous all-out peace. This maintenance of tension allows North Korea to depict other nations as enemies, rather than countries that citizens could flee their own country's regime to. Now, with that out of the way, let's look at how these concepts apply to Hollow Knight. It may seem strange to state that soul was an illicit substance in Hallownest, given that it's the substance that animates most life. However, when analyzing the Pale King's treatment towards certain groups in the kingdom, it becomes clear that attempting to manipulate soul outside of its natural function of granting all beings life was something that the Pale King was completely opposed to. One good example of this is how the snail shamans were treated in Hallownest. All of the snail shamans in the game are shown to have created unique abilities that allow them to manipulate soul, and according to the Whispering Root in the Ancestral Mound, this was considered a shunned power, most likely by Hallownest. Additionally, a dead shaman can be found in the Soul Sanctum, having clearly been experimented on, showing how the lives of the shamans weren't held in particularly high regard by Hallownest. Speaking of the Soul Sanctum, the Pale King had a considerable distaste for the scholars working there as well. After you defeat the Soul Tyrant, he talks about the research of the scholars there, lamenting,
"But the king, why? He opposed everything I did. His jealousy, his madness."
Now, it's entirely possible that the king disapproved of the Soul Sanctum because of the way it used the bugs living in the capital as a resource to get more soul for their experiments. However, I don't actually think this is the case. The Soul Sanctum was conducting this research to combat against the Radiance's plague, which is the exact same thing that the Pale King was trying to do. And of course, the Pale King would understand greater than anyone the impulse to make costly sacrifices for his kingdom. I mean, seriously, his whole shtick was no cost too great, and he killed an untold number of his children for that purpose, certainly way more than the Soul Sanctum killed. Instead, I believe that the Soul Tyrant was onto something when mentioning the Pale King's jealousy. A hidden lore tablet referring to the Pale King states,
"Void, yours is the power opposed."
I believe that the power being referred to here is soul, given the white glow associated with soul and the fact that this glow matches the Pale King and the White Lady. And because of this, I also believe that this lore tablet implies that pale beings in particular are higher beings that have a natural ability to manipulate soul. This is the primary source of the Pale King's divine powers, and is how he granted the bugs of Hallownest higher thought. And most importantly, this is why he didn't approve of other bugs manipulating soul. It all comes back to the cult of personality and the Pale King's desire to be worshipped. Similar to the comparisons between Xi Jinping and Winnie the Pooh actually served as a threat to delegitimize him and his regime, by making him seem less powerful than he wanted his citizens to believe. The bugs of Hallownest experimenting with soul also served as a threat to the Pale King's rule. This is because a major part of the Pale King's cult of personality was that he wished to be worshipped as a deity, and the main reason he could do this was because of his superior mastery of soul, being able to shape it to his very whim. While the scholars and shamans may not have been able to as effortlessly or effectively use soul as the king was, the fact that they could do it at all was a huge threat to his cult of personality, since it showed that the Pale King's power wasn't as impressive or unique as he told his citizens it was. Anyone who was willing to put in enough effort would be able to accomplish at least similar things to what their king was able to, and this would diminish the need for his citizens to worship him. I believe this is why the Pale King constantly opposed anyone trying to use soul for their own purposes. His primary motivation was to keep this power for himself. The other substance I want to discuss that was vilified by Hallownest is lifeblood. According to Salubra, lifeblood was considered to be a taboo, likely by Hallownest, but this on its own doesn't give us much to work with. However, the description for Joni's blessing gives a little more context. The charm is stated to be blessed by Joni, the kindly heretic, which is a huge clue as to why lifeblood was a taboo. Heresy is any belief or opinion contrary to Orthodox religion, and, as we know, there was really only one deity that it was seen as acceptable to worship in Hallownest. The fact that the charm was blessed by Joni, and the fact that she was considered a heretic, implies a religious context surrounding not just Joni, but lifeblood in general. But what is this alternative religion to the Pale King's rule? In the Abyss, there's a very strange room in which you can acquire the Lifeblood Core Charm. It can only be accessed if you have enough lifeblood, and despite the fact that you can just walk into the room once it's opened, it behaves much more like a dream realm than a regular part of Hallownest. It's the only room on the main map that features bottomless pits. There are blue essence particles floating around everywhere, and when you pick up the charm, you don't walk out of the room, but instead the screen fades to white and you wake up in front of the door again, which is exactly what happens when the knight exits a dream. However, the most interesting thing in this room is the giant bug that can be seen blinking in the background of the chamber where you find the charm, labeled in the files as the Abyss Creature. The essence particles in the room are particularly interesting, as differently colored essence particles are often used in the realms of different higher beings. Because of this, I believe that this giant bug is some sort of higher being, and in particular is a god of lifeblood, and this room is its dream realm. The cost to enter this room being to have a lot of lifeblood means only the most devoted consumers of lifeblood would be granted an audience with the Abyss Creature, and receive its blessing. Joni, the kindly heretic, would therefore be a prophet or a messiah of the Abyss Creature, since Joni's blessing is a charm that gives the knight more lifeblood, thus serving almost as a way to make it easier for anyone that took her blessing to access her god, allowing her to spread its influence. If the Abyss Creature is a higher being that creates lifeblood, then that's a very obvious reason why the Pale King would be opposed to it, and label it as heresy. The Abyss Creature is another higher being that exists in Hallownest that is actively trying to spread its influence, and because the Pale King's primary goal is to be worshipped, this is something he would be completely against. Similar to North Korea banning any media that could paint its opponents in a positive light, the Pale King would want to vilify lifeblood for the same reason. It represents an alternative to his rule, and that his citizens don't necessarily need to rely on him. If lifeblood were allowed to be consumed in Hallownest, it could cause a huge loss of subjects, as many of them may turn their backs on the Pale King to worship the god of lifeblood instead. And this is why lifeblood was portrayed as taboo in Hallownest. All of this demonstrates how the Pale King attempted to preserve his cult of personality in Hallownest. His banning of soul experimentation was done to ensure that the citizens of Hallownest wouldn't be able to gain access to the power that he wielded, as this would shatter the cult of personality that he had developed as an all-powerful god with the divine strength that the people had to rely on. The labeling of lifeblood as heresy was also a political move, done to prevent his citizens from turning away from him and worshipping a rival god, the Abyss Creature. Both of these policies, as with everything else the Pale King did during his time as king, was all done for the purpose of maintaining the worship and devotion of his citizens, even when that meant setting aside his people's needs. Even with his mantra of no cost too great, he could never sacrifice his own need to be worshipped, even to save Hallownest, because at the end of the day, he was still a worm, and thus prized the loyalty of his people above everything else. Worms pull bugs into their thrall, till ages pass and kingdoms fall.